and welcome to week 5 session of 1 Peter, A Living Hope. I want to start off by asking today, show of hands, who here has seen the movie Elf? Christmas movie? Yeah? Okay, great. It's a funny movie about how a human baby gets adopted by one of the elves at Santa's workshop. And now we all know that elves are these little tiny toy makers, and they're really merry and jolly, and they eat candy for their sustenance, right? They're a lot of fun. However, humans, including even toddlers, are all bigger than elves. Well, Elf is about Buddy the elf, who ends up growing into the 6'3" elf played by Will Ferrell, and he starts to stand out pretty quickly in the elf world. So he decides one day that he doesn't fit anymore, and he resolves to go to New York City to find his long-lost biological father. So Buddy the elf, filled with optimism and Christmas cheer, decides to go to Manhattan, and the 6'3" ginormous elf, complete with the green tights, is there, pointy hat, trying to locate his father in the middle of hustle and bustle New York City. And while he's on his adventure, he gets mistaken for a Gimbel's elf, and he gets put to work in their workshop. So all throughout the movie, all of these people are experiencing Buddy, and they're grumpy and they're tired, and Buddy is his jovial self, right? He really stands out. His personality is so out there, and it's hilarious. But everybody starts to get curious about Buddy. They kind of wonder, why is he so jolly? Is this even real? And even the people who started off being annoyed by him, which was just about everybody, started becoming really, really curious as to why he was so jolly. No one could be that genuinely happy, but Buddy was. And through his joyful demeanor, he started winning over people and influencing them for the Christmas spirit. Now, this is a silly movie, but it actually illustrates a really significant theological point that Peter is making in this part of his letter. Peter's saying that even in the midst of being ostracized, we are called to stand out for being good and to spread that goodness to others. So Peter writes this suffering audience, telling them that even though they are suffering, do good, spread God's love, and participate in his kingdom work. We are going to stand out for Christ. So we must be prepared as the good witness, for the good question, and with the good answer. Verse 9 starts with that we are not to repay evil for evil, but on the contrary, we're to bless. For to this we have been called. Sounds kind of familiar, right? Like verse 21, now to this you are called, to suffer. Now, if you remember from week 4, we understand that we are to be kind and to spread goodness to everyone, that we might suffer unjustly, but we are to remember Jesus' example and seek to bless others, even if they are unjust to us. Peter has been addressing these elect exiles who are strangers and sojourners in the world. As Christians, God has transformed them, and he has transformed the ways that they participate in their marriages and in their households and in culture by radically loving and by serving others the way that Jesus, their example, did. The summation of this message here is that because Christians have been blessed by God, they should, in all circumstances, be a blessing to other people, as peaceful, gentle, harmonious conduct has a life-changing and even a life-giving effect on the world. So we are to be good witnesses. 1 Peter 3:8 gives us some of the characteristics of these good witnesses. They are to have Christ's mindset, sympathy or deep feelings for each other, brotherly love that serves the corporate good over the individual interest, a tender heart with compassion even for enemies, and humble minds. And from verses 9 through 14, we read what good witnesses are not supposed to do. We are not to repay evil with evil. We are not to revile or revile in return. When we are assailed, we should seek to bless. We should do good and seek, even chase after peace. We're to pray, we are to suffer well, be passionate for what is good, and we are to have no fear of anyone but God. We also see from chapter 4, verse 2, that we are to live for God. Verse 4, don't join in debauchery. And in verses 8 through 11, we are to be self-controlled and in prayer. We are to love one another earnestly, and we are to cover one another's shortcomings with love. We're to have hospitality of our hearts, and we are to use all of these gifts to glorify God and to serve others. Now, all of these behaviors are challenging on a good day, let alone when we're in the midst of suffering. We hear ones like blessing our enemies or covering over sin with love, and we think that God is requiring more than we can bear. Now, there are occasions when love comes in the form of healthy boundaries or counseling is needed, and there are many different ways to cover someone with love. This is why covering over with love acknowledges or returns someone, while covering up is actually hiding or dismissing. Covering someone with love or covering someone over with love is a nuanced biblical wisdom. Now, this is not going to be an easy human reaction, right? It's not natural for us to love in this way, but it is our call. There's something incredibly disarming and even curious about blessing those who seek to harm you. Similar to Buddy the Elf, it's unnerving when we encounter someone so rooted in compassion that their response to insults is to seek to bless. So it causes people to wonder, as verse 15 implies, what is the reason for your hope? It's such a good question. So we are to be prepared as the good witnesses for the good question. What is the reason for your hope? Now, on the one hand, this question seems so simple. But on the other hand, it's so profound and even perplexing. If someone were to ask you right now, what is the reason you have for hope? Why are you so sure that things are going to end well? Why are you so optimistic about the future? Why are you so good to others who are not good back to you? Questions like this make us nervous. They can be personal. Or we might think we need to be really intelligent or winsome. We might feel inadequate to speak to such questions. Or maybe we feel like we need to be really persuasive or convincing. Maybe the person is really important to us, and it feels like a lot of pressure because the stakes are so high. All of those are legitimate reasons why hearing this question can be challenging for us as Christians. We don't want to be off-putting. Sometimes it's even hard to articulate in our own words what it's like to live for Jesus or to have a transformed life. Even as I was writing this, I was struck by my own waxing and waning of what I would and would not say. And part of that is because every question is asked by a specific and particular person in particular circumstances. So each answer will be different according to who asks it and what they need to hear. Thankfully, transforming people's hearts is God's job. He doesn't need us, but he does graciously use us, allowing us to participate in his good mission. So as good witnesses who have been asked a good question, we should be prepared to give the good answer. After I graduated college, I did an internship with the organization my husband and I now work for. I was fairly new to my Christian walk, and even though I read voraciously and I wanted to learn all I could, I still felt like a beginner when it came to sharing the gospel with someone. So one day I emailed my co-intern and I just wanted a short little explanation of what the gospel was, and I expected him to reply something very simple back to me. However, he answered me, "It depends." I was a little confused and slightly annoyed because sometimes he can be cheeky. So I responded, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, it depends on what the person needs to hear. For those who are sick, they need the great physician. For those who are hungry, they need the bread of life." This answer really got my wheels turning, that when we offer people Jesus, who satisfies every need, we can first show this person the parts of Jesus they need most. Just like we wouldn't answer a child's hunger with a jacket, even though it's a good gift, we wouldn't meet every person's needs with the same answer. I appreciated his lesson, and I felt like I was starting to understand the gospel more. But God wasn't finished teaching me this lesson. A few years later, when I was in seminary, I was blessed to sit at the feet of Jaron Bars, a professor of apologetics and outreach. Now, some may be tempted to think that this class was all about giving people persuasive arguments, but no. This class was about steeping deep in God's love, about caring for others, getting to know them well, and living out God's love in front of them. The major writing assignment for this class was a letter to a loved one sharing Jesus with them. He requires it to be 10 pages long. The first few pages involve celebrating the recipient's dignity and what they correctly understood about God, even if they didn't realize it. The middle pages were what they needed to hear, which built off of their understandings mentioned in the first pages. And then the final pages were about how Jesus alone satisfies all of their needs. You see, relationship is so critical here, particularly in our day and age. But if we have been blessed by God, blessed enough to be seen as good witnesses and to have earned the trust and the vulnerability it takes for someone to ask us that good question, we ought to be prepared to give a good answer. We should know the person and understand what thoughts or critiques or objections they might have. We should celebrate their areas of understanding God's goodness. And then we should show them about how that goodness is ultimately pointing them to God. It's ultimately met in Christ. What they're longing for, what they're craving, what they need to hear is only satisfied by pointing them to Jesus and by telling them how He is the fulfillment of what they need. Now think about this. Who in your life needs hope or relief? What do your loved ones need to hear? How can you show them that Jesus meets their needs? For those who are sick, He is the great physician. For those who are hungry, He is the bread of life. For those who are thirsty, He's the living water. For those who are unclean, He is the great high priest. For those who are lost, He's the way. For those in darkness, He is the light. For those who are in turmoil, He's the Prince of Peace. For those who are naked and ashamed, He is the robe of righteousness. For those who are lonely, He is brother and friend. For those who are wounded, He is near to the brokenhearted. For those who are unloved, He's the love that does not let go. And for those who are hopeless, He is the living hope. The goodness of Jesus never changes. All of those needs are met in Him. But what does the person in front of you need? Are you communicating and spreading goodness? How are you sharing your hope? Are you living out God's goodness as the good witness? Would you choose to suffer for doing good, knowing that the world is watching you? Because they are. Beloved, because you have tasted and seen that God is good, live as the good witness, so that others might ask you the good question, and you can engage with them lovingly with the good answer. So how would you answer the good question, what is the reason for your hope?
Well, the answer to that question would be I know whom I've put my trust in. Yeah. And whenever I go down in my life for some reasons, He still is there and He never forsakes me. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, God is always faithful to you, and you can see that in your good times and in your bad times. Yes, thank you. Thank you for that.
Well, I would say that after 20 years of trying to have children and having miscarriages and so many setbacks, that I was in a very deep hole. And then I married a man with 4 children, and they are like my children. And so I trust God now. I know He has a plan for my life, and I'm grateful.
That is so beautiful. He met this need of yours in such a sweet way, and now you know that whenever you need, you can go to Him. I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
I was surprised one time when someone pretty much asked me the question. I was running a very large project, many teams working up against some tight deadlines, stressful, very stressful. And a young woman who was leading one of the key teams walked into my office and basically said, "How are you so calm in the midst of all this?"
Wow.
And I was pretty surprised at the time, but luckily I was able to kind of get out. It's because of my faith, and I trust God and His plan.
Wow, that is amazing. I love that story because she was able to recognize in the storm and turmoil of what was going on around you that there was something different about you, that you were standing out because God was calming you. I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you all for being here with me. Thank you all for joining us. As you move to your small groups, I hope that this is a very fruitful discussion for you so that you know how to answer the good question with the good answer. Thank you so much.